It's a privilege and an honor to be here this morning with you guys. I can really thank you from the bottom of my heart. Everybody's been so nice. And everyone I spoke to said they loved my name, so that makes me feel right at home. So, the title of my talk is How to Change the World in 2 Simple Steps. There once was a man, an old man, who had the habit of going to the beach every morning because he was a writer. He loved to write and it inspired him to be at the beach. And before he started working, he liked to walk along the shore and think, ponder. And on that particular morning, there had been a storm the day before. And all along the shore, starfish had come all across, and they were all spread out as far as the eye could see in either direction. And they were all in the sand, and that was peculiar. And then he kept walking, and he saw in the distance, he saw a young boy who was coming towards him. And he noticed, when he looked at the boy, that he would bend over and pick up something. Every now and then, do the same thing over and over again. And as he got closer to the boy, he asked him, he said, "Hi, son, can I ask you what you're doing?" And the boy lifted his eyes and looked at the older man, and he said, "Well, all those starfish have come on the beach, and when the sun comes up later in the day, they're going to dry up. It's going to kill them. So I just picked them up and I'm throwing them back in the ocean." And the old man chuckled and he said to the kid, he said, "There are thousands upon thousands of starfish. What difference could you possibly make?" And the young man picked up a starfish, and he looked at the older man and he threw the starfish back in the ocean. And he said, "Well, it sure made a difference to that one." Most of us are like the old man in the story. We've been hurt by life, we are seasoned, and we've seen how life can be tough. We have our scars, and we become a little bit cynical when we meet someone younger who has the aspiration to change the world. So we take it upon ourselves to set them straight. When we see a youth that's very inspired to change the world, we know better. So we're going to tell them, "Look, don't want to burst your bubble, but it's not going to happen." And yet, there is a way that you and I can change the world. We can realistically change the world. All of us here has the power within them to do just that. Now, some of you here might think I'm crazy to say this, and that's okay. I respect your opinion. But let me quote a man called Steve Jobs, who once said, "The ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who actually do it." So the first step in changing the world is to grow yourself. Grow yourself. In 1977, there's a movie that came out. It was a miniseries at the time called Jesus of Nazareth. It was a 6-hour-long epic, and it starred Robert Powell, and it was really an amazing movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it. And in this movie, of course, it's epic, so all the apostles are there, and John the Baptist is there as well. He's featured in the movie. And it's very, very good, very poignant. He's in the desert, and he's got his camel skin on, and he's urging people to change their ways, to change their heart. But there's one thing that John the Baptist says in the movie that really caught my attention. At one point in the movie, John the Baptist says, "Before kingdoms change, men must change." Indeed, before we change our families, change ourselves. Gandhi said it best when he said, become the change that you want to see in the world. There's an author of a small book that was written years and years ago that's called As a Man Thinketh. The quote that stands out in that book is this: men are anxious to improve their circumstances, but are unwilling to improve themselves. Therefore, remain bound. Many of us are eager for our circumstances to change. We want the world to get better, but we're not willing to change ourselves. Personal growth, growing ourselves, is the duty of anyone who wants to see change in the world. We human beings, we're very peculiar beings. In all of God's green earth, we are the only creatures who limit our personal growth. How tall will a tree grow? A tree will grow as tall as it possibly can. A tree will not stop growing, ever. Its branches are always spreading out. Its roots are always digging deeper and deeper. And we as human beings are the only creatures on God's green earth that have the choice to grow more or to stop growing. So we have been given the privilege of choice. And with that privilege, we can choose to acquire as much knowledge as we possibly can. We can choose to read as many books as we possibly can. We can choose to become the most that we possibly can. We can choose to make as many friends as we possibly can. We can choose to earn as much as we possibly can. We can choose to become the best that we possibly can. We can make ourselves into the best version of ourselves as we possibly can. That's a choice. But it's hard work. Now you may ask, why should I give myself all this trouble to grow myself? Well, it's very simple. The essence of life is growth. Growth is the only evidence of life, as John Henry Newman said. My friends, your life is God's gift to you. What you do with your lives, now that is your gift back to God. The purpose and glory of man is to become as much as they possibly can, because that's how we glorify God. My mentor, John Maxwell, put it this way: all great leaders have understood that their number one responsibility is cultivating their own discipline and personal growth. Those who cannot lead themselves cannot possibly lead others. Now, I believe that all of you people here at the Rotary are community leaders. Therefore, there is no valid excuse for any of you to avoid growing yourselves. You are community leaders, and you should embrace growth. What makes me say that you people here, all of you, are community leaders? Well, it's because of what the Rotary Club espouses. The Rotary's official mottos are service above self, or, the other one I heard was, one profits most who serves best. Only true leaders make service above self their aim. Which brings me to my second step, to change the world. The second step to change the world is to add value to others. To add value to others. We often have a very lofty view of what service to others may mean. We often think that we have to do grandiose things in order to serve our fellow man. Nothing could be further from the truth. Sometimes it's in the littlest things that we can have the biggest impact. I'm going to tell you the story of my own childhood. I had a very, very difficult childhood growing up. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and I lived with my mom at first. Later I lived with my father. And then I was sent to live with my grandparents for 2 years. Between the ages of 4 and 6, I lived with my paternal grandparents. Now, my grandfather was a book lover. He loved books above all things. They lived in only a one-bedroom apartment in a huge apartment building in Montreal. They had a living room that was about 12 by 20, and every wall, just like wallpaper, were bookshelves. He loved to read, but most of all, he loved books. And since they were elderly folks, they didn't take me out much. But what they did, what my grandfather did, is oftentimes, every day actually, he took me aside and he took a book and he read it with me. Now I brought this book, I'm just going to show you this book. Animals of East Africa by National Geographic. Now it's not a children's book, obviously. But every day, my grandfather would take this book and go through it. It's pretty thick. It would take at least 25 to 30 minutes every day, consistently. And the thing that was amazing is that he really never showed any lack of enthusiasm. Even if it was the 100th time that he sat with me, it was always as if it was the first time. And there were some animals that kind of were the thing of nightmares, like this warthog. And they were all more amusing than the next, and I was just passionate. I became passionate about animals. But more than that, I became passionate about books. You see, that's the inheritance he gave me, the love of books. He was so enthusiastic about books, and he took the time, day in, day out, every day, to look at this book with me, which I own today. I'm so happy to have it. This book changed my life. So, now, my grandfather, at the time, he had no clue that he would raise a reader. He was doing that to be a good granddad, right? But he not only raised a reader, he raised a lover of books. And he not only raised a lover of books, but he raised someone who would someday, and he didn't know that for sure, would become an author. And the 2 books I wrote are books about personal growth. And Lead Like a Superhero, which I'm sure all of you will buy, right? When it comes out, it's going to come out in December in digital, and it's going to come out in the spring in paper in stores all across North America. But this book could potentially change the lives of hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, and God willing, millions of people, obviously. But the point is, because one man took the time to add value to me, I became an author. And because of that, the ripples in the pond could reach hundreds, maybe thousands of people. All this because one man added value to his grandson. So we can all effect great change in someone by taking the time to effect change. There was one day a young woman who was walking home from work, and right there on the street she saw a young girl begging for money. And the girl was maybe about 8 or 10. And she was in very dirty, thin clothing, and you could see her cheeks were red from the cold, and she just took change from her pocket and gave it in her begging bowl, and she kept walking. But then she started feeling guilty. She was like, I'm going home to a warm house, and this little girl is right there on the street corner begging for a few dollars to get some food. And then her guilt changed to frustration. And her frustration became a prayer of frustration towards God. And in her heart, she said to God, why, let this happen? A little girl like that, begging for money just to eat. Why don't you do anything about things like that? And to her surprise, God answered. And God said, I did do something. I created you. When we see people in need, sometimes our first reflex is to encourage them, tell them this too shall pass. I'll pray for you. I'm thinking about you. But instead of saying to people, I'll pray for you, or trying to give them a smack on the back, why don't we try to become their answer to prayer? Why don't we try to become the miracle in their lives? That could make a huge difference. If you have money, you can offer to pay their rent that they can't pay, or any such needs that they might have for food. If you don't have money, and you have time, you can invite them over for coffee. You can offer to babysit their kids if they're overwhelmed with their children. The point is, you can do something to change somebody's life by adding value to them. There's a story that went viral on the internet that really touched my heart. It's a story of a young man who was a teenager. He was about 14 years old. He was walking home from school. And he saw this other young man ahead of him who was walking home from school as well. And he looked at him, and the young man ahead of him was carrying all of what seemed like all of his books from school. And he's like, who would do such a thing? What kind of a nerd would carry all of his books from school? But as the young man was ahead of him, he saw a group of other boys come along and started pushing him and shoving him, and all his books fell off. And his glasses, he was wearing glasses, and they fell in the dirt, and they kicked him, and he fell, and then they ran off. So the guy who saw this, his name was John, he ran to him, and he started helping him up. And he told him, he says, those guys are jerks. They should get lives. And the young man, adjusting his glasses, smiled, and he said, thank you. But it was one of those thank yous that seemed really like heartfelt, very deep. And so he helped him up with his books. And as he began talking with him, he learned his name was Kyle. So John decided to walk with Kyle, and he learned that he lived not too far from him. And he also learned that before he went to his school, he went to private school. So as they walked over to Kyle's house, John said, look, I'm getting together with a bunch of friends. We're going to go at the playground this weekend. We're going to play football. Would you like to come? Would you like to join us? So Kyle said, very enthusiastic, he said, yeah, sure. And on that Saturday, on that weekend, Kyle went with John and his friends, and they played football, and they had a great time. And John realized, he said, well, you know what? Kyle is a great guy. He's really cool. And what happened next was that they grew very close. They became best friends. And all through high school, they were very, very close. And Kyle, who, when John met him, was very frail and unsure of himself, grew during high school, and he filled up. He became somewhat of a jock, even though he was wearing glasses. He was a remarkable young man. He was a straight-A student. And all the girls loved him. They all wanted to date him. He was super popular. And the time came when they were to graduate from high school. And Kyle was to be the valedictorian for that graduation. And as he was reviewing his notes for his speech, John was, man, I'm so glad I'm the one giving the speech. And he went to see Kyle and gave him a smack in the back. He says, you're going to do great, big fella. And Kyle looked at John with that big, grateful smile once again. And John knew he had made an impact. And Kyle went to the podium on that day, on that graduation day, and he began his speech saying, when we're graduating, it's a time to reflect on all of those people who have helped us to get there. And it's time to be thankful for all of those people, and mostly our friends. And then Kyle said, I'm going to tell you a story. And Kyle said the story of when he met John. He said, I was planning to kill myself on a Friday. I emptied my locker. I brought all my books home because I didn't want my mother to come to school to have to empty my locker after I had done this unspeakable act. And then came John, and he talked about how that particular moment changed his life. And John was in the audience, and he was flabbergasted, couldn't believe that Kyle, he never heard of that. And the parents of Kyle glanced at John's direction with such gratefulness. All this to say that one small gesture can change a person's life. One small gesture on our part can create great ripples in the life of another. Now, Kyle was to become a doctor. And the amazing thing about this is, when you think about it, that young man who avoided suicide because of one person's ability to connect, one person's desire to add value. Now, this man was to become a doctor, and who knows how many lives through his profession he would save ultimately. So we have it within us to impact the world, to change the world one person at a time. And we can start with ourselves by looking in the mirror. So here's what you're going to do now. You're going to turn to the person on your left, and you're going to say, I will grow me, and I will serve you. Turn to the person on your left. Say, I will grow me, and I will serve you.
Okay, say it to me. On to your left.
And then turn to the person on your left and say to them, and it's about time. Now, a poet once said, would you have your song endure? Build on the human heart. Build on the human heart. I will leave you with the words of the late Mother Teresa, who was accepted as a saint lately. She said, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. Grow yourselves